Welcome to another Build Day TV episode. I'm Alastair Cook, and today we're going to continue our series looking at the Oracle Cloud infrastructure and the Oracle Cloud VMware solution. And we're going to start deploying an actual end application. And I'm very happy to have Tom Green again as being the man with his hands on the controls and doing the actual work. How are you doing today, Tom?
I'm doing great, and it's finally the year of the VDI. It's the VDI on the cloud.
That VDI might just finally have its year. I think it might actually be next year rather than this year, because people discover that they really have to solve problems. I was thinking that this morning actually as I was doing my moustache, is that it's going to be next year when people have a real crisis with all of these distributed work from home laptops, and there's a big security vulnerability hits, and people start losing data that they realize putting things in data centers makes them easier to manage. So I think probably next year's year of VDI if we continue to work from home. And that year of VDI, well, VDI was the driver for us looking at the Oracle Cloud VMware solution, was to get VMware View up in there. How did it go building View on top of that already deployed Oracle VMware solution cluster, and you'd already built Active Directory beforehand? How was deploying View on top of the Oracle solution?
It was exactly like building View inside of the on-premises data center in Chicago. So we were just able to deploy the Windows virtual machines and get everything set up, and there were no surprises since we'd already had networking between Chicago and OCVS going. It was a smooth transaction. Is just perfect.
And we chose to build out a completely new View infrastructure, View pod, in the Ashburn Oracle environment, rather than trying to extend, because if I remember rightly, it's not supported to extend in a pair of connection servers across a WAN link, which is essentially what we have. So it's a new connection server environment, new pools in Oracle.
Yep. Yeah, that's what our goal is. We're going to get some instant clone pool in Oracle. We're going to spin up some virtual machines, and then we're going to kind of cloudify our environment and get some security servers that are sitting outside of OCVS.
Okay. What do we need to do to get started?
Well, first we're going to start in the Horizon administrator. I'm using the Flex client. I'm used to it and more comfortable, and there seems to be a few settings that are in this that aren't exactly in the HTML5 one yet. So I think that it'll get there just like vCenter did. Mm-hmm. But so we're starting out inside Horizon. So the very first thing on the docket is to create a desktop pool. We want to make sure that we have the desktops that they can run, that View is communicating with vCenter, all of that before we get started with any of connectivity, because you need something to connect to. As Alastair had said, we've already set up the Horizon environment. However, we're going to be using instant clones. And a part of instant clones is it'll go ahead and it'll join it to your domain for you. If you're using a provisioned pool, you do that through a customization script. But with instant clones, you don't use a customization script through vCenter as much. So something that's tripped me up a few times whenever I've deployed it is remembering to come and add a domain for it to add you to. So from in here, we will go into View configuration, instant clone domain accounts, and it'll actually pull the domain out of the domains that are assigned on the computer. So if you see here, since we have a Active Directory trust, it can see the data center domain in Chicago and also the OCI domain. So that's what we're going to connect to.
So we have a resource domain in OCI, but we have our authentication domain on premises in Chicago.
Correct. So I'm going to use, it's not necessarily best practice, but we're going to use the administrator for this. Do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah. Use a service account in here, but
yeah,
we're not teaching you the best way of deploying View, although we're doing a reasonably good job of it.
Yeah, we're best-ish practice. Horseshoe View. It's as close as we can get to real life, but going in here, after you've set that instant clone domain account, you won't have as many reasons to have to cancel out and go back and do something else. So we all know every good task takes 2 or 3 running starts. So anyway, here we go into the desktop pool section, and we're going to add a desktop pool. I'm going to go a little quick through this because this is typical Vue stuff. There's nothing special with OCI about it, but we'll stop and talk about some of that. So we're going to start with an automated desktop pool, and we're going to do floating. And that's because that supports instant clone. We're going to choose instant clone. We're going to connect it to the vCenter server that is in OCVS. If I had added the on-premises vCenter server in Chicago, it would also show up here, but we're going to choose to keep it all in the cloud. We're going to call the ID on this is going to be OCI instant clone. We're going to use this as VDI OCI. The display name just shows up on the clients whenever you log in. It's helpful for me. It may not be helpful for a user for this test. We're going to.
Yeah, you usually have a descriptive name in there for the user.
Yeah. So when they're doing the desktop pool sessions, going through, going to basically keep the defaults. I like to check on HTML access. Just so you could use the browser if you chose to. Our test, we're going to end up using the Vue client. I like that experience. So we're going to enable provisioning. It's going to stop on an error for a naming pattern. The little curly bracket. What do you call that, Alastair? Is that the French bracket or just a curly?
I always call it a curly bracket.
I'm writing this as the naming pattern. If you're kind of curious where the brackets and such came from, down here in the help file that accompanies you through this, it tells you put n as number and fixed equals the number of digits that you want.
And it left pads with zeros so that there's a consistent list, so you don't get desktop number 1 at the top of the list followed by desktop number 11. You get desktop 001 followed by 002.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good call out. So in this test, I'm going to spin up 15 virtual machines. If you could, with a 3-node cluster that you get by default with OCVS, you could easily do more. We're just going to do 15 as a proof of concept. Provisioning all machines up front. I'm just going to go ahead and let it turn it on. We'll see about how long it takes to do all this. We're storing it on vSAN, so we're going to choose to use VMware vSAN. Here you just kind of connect the dots and fill out stuff. We'd already moved a template over from Chicago, so we did a clone to move a template over across the Fast Connect. And that template has a snapshot that's already taken. Just a little tip that I ran into with this. You have to go into the virtual machine settings if you want to be able to support multiple monitors through Vue. So I turned up the RAM from the default. It was 8, and then said use 2 monitors. So that could be something.
With other pools, Vue can do that at runtime, but with instant clone, it has to be on that parent machine.
Yep. A VM folder location. Pre-created a Horizon folder. If you haven't done that, you would have to drop out here, go to your vSphere and set it up. As I've said, there's a lot of places where you might have to take another run at it. I'm going to put it on the only one cluster that we have. And you probably want to set up a separate pool, resource pool for this. We're going to put it into the workload because the entire reason for this in our scenarios, we're doing it so we can burst access or burst extra capacity for VDI. So you may want to create a separate one if you have multiple workloads on the same cluster. I chose the vSAN data store, and we're going to use the network from the parent VM. It's currently in a NSXT segment that's dedicated to VDI.
We created that one in a previous video.
Yep. So here is under guest customization. I think it's called quick clone is what it does. So here is where you choose the domain. If you had not entered an instant clone domain account before we got started, this would be blank. And you would probably heading to watch the video and see exactly how you're supposed to do that. we created a container in Active Directory for VDI. And we're going to allow reuse of pre-existing computer accounts. And if you hit the little bubble, it lets you, so it doesn't keep creating new accounts. So if you have VDI1 and we've got 15, and if you need to deploy another one, it may use the VDI1 account if VDI1's gone. So I allow it to do that to keep AD a little cleaner. We're not going to put any of power on, power off scripts, but if you're doing customizations or if you're wanting to set up different settings, you would do that. We're not going to do that in this.
And again, nothing we've touched in this entire wizard is specific to OCI. It's all generic VMware View, Horizon View configuration.
Yeah, this is just like we've said throughout the whole series. What we've got is just VMware. It just happens to be in Oracle's cloud and it's adjacent to Oracle's services, but it's VMware.
Yeah.
So we're ready to complete. We hit finish, and it is enabled.
It'll be busy instantly cloning now.
Yeah, it'll instantly clone, and probably 15, 20 minutes we'll end up having 15 machines. It is very fast and it's very fun to watch it go and just be like, wow, that really worked. So what I'm doing now is I'm adding an entitlement. I pre-created a group that is CTOA from Chicago administrators. So I'm not creating new accounts, but I put the accounts for the administrators in Chicago into a group in this domain. So that way I can delegate different resources to that group without having to manage accounts and making sure things are tidy, I think. And that's really about it for our configuration. We're going to go over to vSphere client. At a certain point, we should start seeing things happening. So you see right here, power on virtual machine. So it started the template creation process. It is taking all of the state, and eventually we'll see it actually spin up machines that have the naming convention that we specify.
So at this point, that master machine is being cloned to each of the machines in the cluster in order that then each machine in the cluster can power on the machine from which the instant clone occurs. So you get a copy of that instant clone for each of your hosts, and then you end up with the instant clone desktops themselves.
Yeah, and it actually creates a folder structure as well, so you can kind of clone see what the different machines are doing.
Yeah.
So
that's still going to take the time it takes to clone a desktop machine. While it's doing that, should we take a look at doing the security server so we can access it from outside of our network as well?
Yeah, we can. While that's cooking, let's go ahead and do that.
So in terms of design, we decided that our end users are working from home, and so we want them to connect over the shortest network distance possible. They don't actually have a network connection from their home to the Chicago data center, so across the internal network is not the best method. And so we're going to deploy a security server into Ashburn and with the Oracle environment, and then the users are going to come in from the internet directly into the Oracle data center in Ashburn to get to the desktops.
Yep. And we're taking this opportunity to actually go into a hybrid model between OCI and OCVS. So instead of, it's possible, and we could set up a security server inside of OCVS and put a external load balancer in front of it in order to talk directly to the security server virtual machine. That's very similar to how we are running it on premises. However, we've decided that we're going to actually deploy a OCI VM, and we're going to install security server on that virtual machine. That way we can keep it in sort of a DMZ. It's completely outside of VMware, and it gives us the ability to handle security differently outside of VMware.
Yeah, we can use the Oracle network controls more.
It also allows us to directly put a public IP onto the the machine, and it keeps the identity in the session that way. So there are a lot of advantages to doing that. So to get started with that, first you go and you deploy an instance. We've deployed an instance in a previous video whenever we were deploying our jump box. So I've already went ahead, much like a cooking show, and we have a pre-deployed instance primed and ready to be logged into. The name, it follows the naming convention of the security server inside our OCVS, so it's going to be called View Security Server 02. A little thing that we did behind the scenes, we created a security server that was internal just to make sure that everything was going to work right. We were going to be able to communicate internal, but as Alastair had said, our goal is to provide external access. So we've named it. We're going to copy our public IP address to do RDP into it. Look at that. I love it when the thing works the first time.
It saves Jeffrey from doing a lot of video editing to make us look like we know what we're doing.
We're inside of that instance that we deployed called View S02. Right now, it is a security server. You can access it from the internet, and I can just go ahead and start deploying Horizon. I've already copied the Horizon bits onto the desktop. However, we're going to have to set up some firewall rules to make it work, and even before we can install the service, it's going to fail because it won't be able to communicate back into the environment. So we need to create some firewall rules that'll protect the environment from the server, but will also allow it to communicate.
So we're going to treat the security server as a semi-trusted server, and we're going to allow restricted access from the internet and restricted access from the security server to our internal network.
Yep. So we're going to treat it, as like a DMZ almost.
Yeah.
Now that we have the connection into the security server, we're going to head back to networking by going to the hamburger, the networking, and virtual cloud networks. Choose our VCN security list for the is the default security list for the entire VCN. First, we need to make sure this is allowing ingress. Just kind of start from the very beginning. Let's go to a route table. Make sure that the route table says, yes, this is how you get to the internet through the internet gateway. We're good there. Going to go back. We're going to look at the security group. This is the security group that talks between between the internal network or into the essentially View. So
this is the Oracle managed subnets to the NSX managed subnets.
Yes. Yeah, this is where we need to be. We're going to add rule. So right now, we're actually going to add, so we're specifying this one IP address as the source, and the destination is coming in. So we're saying that this IP address is going to be able to talk to the server on port 4172. These are for blast, for HTML5 access, and for PC over IP access are the things that we're going to add. And these rules came from the Horizon documentation. So if you want to find those, you can search for it on docs.google.com or docs.vmware.com, or you can search Google for it. We're setting them very specific because this is one security server. It's going to come in. You could also set it for the entire range, but if you're using a DMZ, there may be other VMs that get deployed into it, and that may not want to be able to you may not want them to be able to communicate back in on these ports. It all depends on your security posture.
And you could equally do, if you've got multiple security servers, then they might live within a particular CIDR. So you might do a /30 on here rather than a /32.
Yeah. The CIDR in particular is only going to have one. But yeah, if you were load balancing or if you were doing two, that's certainly what you would want to do. This is probably a great time to some fast forwarding or something, because there's going to be a few more rules that we need to to add.
Jeffrey will magic that for us. And we've allowed all of the standard ports from the security server inwards to the connection server. So now that installer should run successfully for installing the security server software.
Yep. So let's... Remote session ended on that one because I opened it on this one.
You connected another one.
Philosophy is why have 3 jump box sessions open when you can have 5, 2 of which are the same. So we're going to go through the typical installation for a security server. So here at this point, you choose security server. As you notice, we're on a virtual machine that's in the VCN. It's a Oracle virtual machine. It's outside of the VMware environment, as we've been saying. It is joined to the domain that's running inside of the VMware environment too.
So get name resolution and time sync correctly out of our Active Directory environment.
Yep. Fingers crossed that we'll get some communication here.
But we got all our firewall rules correct.
Oh,
That looks good.
that looks good. We have to actually go back over to our view administrator here and create a sync password. The sync password will allow the connection server to make a secure connection back to the security server. So to do that, you go into Horizon, go to servers, go to the connection server tab, click on the server that you want, specify security server pairing password.
And that password's used to set up an enduring trust between the connection server and the security server.
Mm-hmm. So at this point, if you have DNS, a public DNS name, an IP address for this server, this is where you would enter it in. We don't have the public DNS set up for this at the moment. We're just going to put the IP address in for the external URL and such. That's not best practice or what you would want to do, but we don't have a CTOA. Yeah. And we don't own a public DNS name where we could get a certificate and such.
For production deployment, you would have a web service, a public DNS zone and a server certificate that you'd apply as well. So we're probably not going to get our certificates very clean in here as well.
Yeah, there'll be some red. So the public IP.
You lost a slash on that blast URL.
Yep. Look.
Yep.
Just checking make sure everybody was paying attention.
It's the kind of error I make all the time.
Yeah. Copy and paste is great to a point. So I'm going to just let it configure the Windows firewall automatically. You could go into the advanced settings and set all the firewall rules yourself, but we'll let VMware do the heavy lifting. While that is installing, let's check on the status of our VDI. All right. So if you look, we have our 15 virtual machines set up in the time it took us to go and kick off the install of our security server. So when the security server comes up, we should be ready to try the connection, but I don't think that it would work.
Because we haven't got a firewall rule allowing the inbound traffic to the security server.
Exactly. That's a good catch. So if we hadn't done that, then we would have been scratching our heads and going back and forth, and that is done in a security list. We don't have a security group on that subnet. We're using a security list on that. So as of right now, we're going to say everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Can talk TCP and something
that we can do a comma separated list in these things. So
yep. So we're going to try that out. 55000 443 for UDP, and we'll make another one, or for TCP, and we'll make another one for UDP.
So whereabouts is this view client running?
This view client is running in sunny Orlando, Florida.
Right.
The IP address, which is still up there, is 150.136.111.83. Certificate is invalid. And it's not letting me do it this time.
So then you need to go into the settings on the client to say, don't even warn me. If I remember correctly, the view client, in here in the configure SSL option, although you say warn before connecting to untrusted, it still just fails. You have to say, don't even warn me when I'm hitting an untrusted certificate.
Does it warn you that it's not connecting then? Because it said it couldn't connect. But...
it refused to connect when you said warn me. It warns and then fails. If you say fail, it just fails without warning, and you have to say, don't even warn me for it to accept an untrusted certificate. It's not the behavior I would have expected from the descriptions that were in there.
Yeah. So it's now giving me the red
untrusted
warnings, but I trust this. Let's put my domain credentials into any untrusted endpoint, right?
Again, this is where having the DNS set up and having a trusted certificate on the actual server is really important. But it's standard view behavior.
All right. And so we connected in. It's seeing the pool. If you remember, I called it VDI OCI.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to click and see what happens. And I was there.
Oh, we got past the black screen. There used to be a time when the black screen was a big problem for PC over IP connections.
Yeah. That means PC over IP ports that we entered are working just fine. It's preparing Windows. So the instant clone.
We're using Blast rather than PC over IP for this pool.
Okay.
It's not the not Horizon version. I think it was 6 was the last one that I used to teach. Yeah. So here it is. The desktop inside of OCI. So or at least inside the Oracle Cloud VMware solution.
Yep. And so there you go. The host name is OCI VDI 001, which is what we would expect it to be called.
But the network flow is coming in from a static IP address configured in the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or Oracle, the virtual network side, into a compute instance in the Oracle side, and then through NSX into the VDI desktop that's inside the VMware part of the Oracle VMware solution. So we've got an interaction between the non-VMware virtual machine instance and the VMware virtual machine instance, all inside that Oracle Cloud Infrastructure.
Yes,
it's a reasonably complex flow. I think we need diagrams in this.
Yeah, that would be pretty good diagrams, some use case. I'm sure that the architecture would really work and could serve very well, especially if you're needing to create very large connection servers or a lot of connection servers for some reason.
Yeah, if I'm remembering rightly, it's a connection server for every 2,000 concurrent users. And so for a large organization, you definitely have multiple connection servers and multiple security servers.
Yep.
And it's a N+1 naturally.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you'd normally for production have multiple servers and load balancers and lots of scaling in here. And it does also allow us to have the VMware side of it primarily as a desktop resource environment. So some of the larger designs for View like to separate out the actual desktops run on one group of vSphere hosts, and you separately run the actual infrastructure to run View. So you might have, in this case, we might have built the connection server as a virtual machine directly on OCI and have it talking to vCenter that's running inside this vSphere environment. That would still be another deployment methodology, and now all the VMware component that's running out VDI desktops is just running VDI desktops. So I think there'll be some interesting deployment architectures on top of this.
Yeah, there's a lot of flexibility. You can use some of the more cloud focused technologies. You can use more VMs. So it will be very interesting to see how people get in and start deploying View on this stuff.
Yeah, and having full control to the vSphere means it's just the same as if you had a vSphere cluster on premises. All of the things that you can do on premises, you can do with this vSphere cluster too.
Yep.
Cool. So we've deployed a connection server. We've set all the firewall rules to allow access from a public IP address. We've validated that connecting over the internet into the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure gives us a VDI desktop. It looks like we've done a View deployment on top of the Oracle VMware solution.
Yeah, it seems like it to me.
Can you quickly pop back into the vSphere console and see what kind of resource usage we're seeing out of these 15 desktops?
Sure. We are.
What does hosting clusters look like for the overall usage of resources? Because we've got our domain as well as our primary connection servers are on there, but we're using 300 gigs of memory out of the 2.25 terabytes that we have available.
Yeah. We could deploy very many more instant clones before we start having any problems.
All right. Well, thank you, Tom, for walking us through that remarkably simple deployment of VMware View and a security server on top of the Oracle Cloud infrastructure, instant clones and all, which is, of course, VMware's favorite current technology for creating new VDI desktops. Stay tuned for more videos. We're going to be looking at more elements of working with the Oracle Cloud VMware solution and the Oracle Cloud infrastructure. But for now, I'm Alastair, and thank you, Tom, for being our subject matter expert on this.
Thank you for having me.